I've always been fascinated with hybrids, things that come from mixed origins or that have mixed compositions. Hybrids show up in a lot of areas of my life. I'm a hybrid of sorts. My mom's Chinese and my father's Canadian. And for the past 5 years, I've been working in a hybrid space, the Complex Continuing Care Unit of Bloorview Kids Rehab, which is Canada's largest pediatric rehabilitation hospital. The children on Complex Continuing Care are children with profound disabilities. They're not in life or death situations, so they don't belong in an acute care setting. But most of them are 24-hour dependent on nutrition and ventilator technologies to keep them alive, and a lot of them are medically very fragile, so they're too complex to care for at home. These children live on the unit, and that makes this space a hybrid space. It's part healthcare. It's very unusual to not be on the unit and not be witnessing a medical interaction taking place. Nurses have to be with the children 24 hours a day, and the children have a whole host of doctors and therapists that are constantly visiting them. But like I said, this is the children's home, and in that capacity, it is a place where meaningful social interactions occur. It is a space where they experience almost every single event of their lives. It's where they live their lives. It's a hybrid space, part healthcare and part home. I started volunteering 2 nights a week on this space about 5 years ago, and the first few months of being on the unit were some of the most intimidating experiences of my life. I want you to try imagine what it's like meeting one of these children for the first time. These children can't move and can't speak. So imagine that I put you in a room with a stranger, a complete stranger, and I ask you to interact with them for an hour. And you realize that you and this stranger don't share a single common life experience. What would you talk about? How would you interact with them? And now imagine that the stranger, now that you're in a room with, I've told you that not only do they not necessarily share a common life experience with you, they don't necessarily understand your language, they don't have facial expressions, and they don't have body language for you to read. How would you communicate with them? What would you say? What would you do? How would you feel? The reality is that these children don't move and speak, and they're connected by tubes and tubes to these complex medical devices behind them, and these medical devices are constantly ringing with alarms. How would you feel? What would be the important information that you would want to express in exchange with them? I didn't know the answer to any of these questions when I first started volunteering on this unit. I found being in a room with someone who I didn't know how to interact with incredibly uncomfortable and awkward. I used to arm myself with books when I walked into the room because then I would be able to walk over to their bed and read to them, and that would give us something to fill the silence between us. The therapeutic recreation staff at Bloorview are wonderful. They planned activities every single night, so sometimes I would fill my time doing activities with the kids. I would place my hands over theirs, and together we would play music, or we would chop vegetables for a communal meal that we were cooking together. And after about a year of this, I found myself getting more and more comfortable on the unit. The sights and the smells and the sounds all became familiar, but I became more and more uncomfortable with the nature of my interaction with the children. I didn't know them. Did they like me? Did they even know I was there? What did they like? What did they not like? Who were they? And so, in an attempt to answer this question, I started observing the behaviors of these children and the interaction of these children with the people around them. And to my dismay, I found that the majority of these interactions were medically related. The nurses would come over and change the children's diapers, and they would suction the saliva that would build up constantly at the back of their throat. They would respond to their children when the alarms beeped, but the majority of the interaction was medical, and there was very, very little conversation. I talked about how this was a hybrid space, but all of the interactions that I was witnessing were healthcare and not home. Fortunately, there were a couple of wonderful, wonderful exceptions to this rule. A couple of the parents of children on the unit have rearranged their entire lives so that they could visit their children every single night, even though their child has never given them an indication that they know that they are there. These parents are my heroes. They're so inspirational to watch. Their devotion and their care to their children is incredible. And they interact with their children in a very different way than anyone else on the unit. They talk to their children. They touch their children. They take their children out for long walks around the unit. They pay attention to the slightest movement that their children gives and respond to it. They tell stories about their children, and they're always talking about their children to the other people around them. And as I began interacting with the parents, I found myself seeing these children through different eyes. I found myself responding to the slightest movements, small changes in their lips, slight raises of their eyes if they lifted a finger, and sometimes even changes in their breathing would be indicators of their responses. And as I started being able to read the children, to be able to see how they were responding, I started being able to pull out patterns. Oh, Joey does this whenever I do that. Oh, this person likes this, they don't like that. I started getting a sense of who they were as people. And I started finding connections between the situation that these children are in and so many others in our healthcare system. There is a staggering number of people in our healthcare system who live in the hospital and don't have any means of communication. This can be the result of a disability that you're born with, but it can also be the result of a temporary and unexpected event. If a doctor needs to save your life, they'll often put a tube down your throat to help you to breathe, but this tube stops you from speaking. And if you've been in an accident, a lot of times your movement isn't impaired. So you're in a situation where you can't move and can't speak. People who have suffered stroke, people who with traumatic brain injury are all in situations where they spend extended times at the hospital and can't communicate. Often, the family members of these people are so overwhelmed by the situation that they can't function as effective interpreters in these situations. And while there are augmentative communication technologies out there, most of those require a level of cognition and energy and motivation that a lot of these people just don't have. And so, how do we communicate with them? What's important to say? What do we do? I was so privileged to be able to work with the parents who taught me to see through their eyes, to function as an interpreter of these child's needs. And I wanted to come up with a way of teaching other people to recognize that these silent, motionless people, people who are said to be silent, were actually people, were actually persons, and were responding to their environment. And so around this time, I became interested in the potential of physiological signals to show the responsivity of people to their environment. This is a block diagram of your nervous system. All of the muscle contractions in your body, all of the gland excretions in your body are controlled by one of two nervous systems, the somatic nervous system or your autonomic nervous system. Your somatic nervous system controls all of your voluntary muscles, and it's this nervous system that's impaired in most of the people who can't move and can't speak. Your autonomic nervous system controls gland excretions, for example, and your involuntary muscles, like your cardiac muscles. And this system is a system that I saw a lot of potential in for communicating with these people who couldn't move and couldn't speak, because this system remains intact in those individuals. In particular, I was interested in 4 different signals. The first was electrodermal activity. If I place 2 electrodes on different parts of your skin and measure the resistance between them, that resistance is a function of the amount of sweat in your skin, because the water and the salt in sweat affect the electrical conductivity between the 2 electrodes. The amount of sweat in your skin is controlled by your autonomic nervous system, and it's higher when you're stressed and lower when you're relaxed. The second signal that I was interested in was skin temperature, which I measure with a very, very sensitive thermometer that's put at the tip of your fingers. At the tip of your fingers, you've got blood vessels that contract and that dilate according to your autonomic nervous system arousal and stress levels. The other 2 signals are easier to explain. Your heart rate and your respiration rate are measures of how many times your heart beats and how many times you breathe per minute. All 4 of these signals change according to our mental and emotional state. Think about how the details of how your hands feel, how your chest feels when you're nervous, when you're in love, when you're stressed. Your body manifests these emotions. And if we could find a way of showing this, of showing these manifestations of these emotions, I believed that we could find a way of getting into the person that was locked inside these bodies. And so I started exploring this idea with the children that I met at Blueview Kids Rehab. This is a picture of me and Max. Max is a 15-year-old boy with spastic quadriplegia and cerebral palsy, so he doesn't have any consistent way of interacting with his environment. He doesn't have an established yes and no. He lives with his family, and his family is so devoted to him. They can read him. They understand his responses. And they're constantly looking for ways to share who Max is with everyone that they meet. When they introduced me to him, for the first 2 years, I couldn't read him. I had no idea what these responses that they were seeing in him were. But then I hooked him up to my physiological signal equipment, and I looked at how his body responded when his mom was showing him different things. I'm going to show you a video of what Max's physiological signals looked like when he looked at one of his favorite toys, which is a Tyrannosaurus Rex, walking across the table in front of him. This is what his physiological signals look like. Does that mean anything to any of you? This is an exciting video for me because I know what these signals mean. I can see, especially in that green line, that he was responding to the Tyrannosaurus Rex. And that was so cool because I didn't know that he noticed that there was something walking in front of him. But I can see in these signals that he is. I'm an engineer by training. It's not too difficult for me to wrap my mind around these signals, pick out their features. I created a signal processing algorithm where I would take these signals, and the output of the algorithm was to spit out the results in a 4-dimensional space that showed the features of these signals. And somehow this wasn't intuitive to other people. I remember very distinctly working with one of the children downstairs who everyone thought was sleeping. They constantly sleeping. He didn't have any sort of interaction with the environment. And therapeutic clowns came in and interacted with him, came out and said, yeah, he wasn't there, he wasn't present. And I recorded his signals, and I put them into my algorithm, and I looked at the results, and I was like, oh my God, he's there, he's responding, he knows that they're there. And I ran through the hallways of Blairview, and I showed all of my colleagues, and they looked at the graph of lines and the dots that came out of my algorithm, and they were blank. That's nice stuff. This was clearly not the way to represent these signals. I needed a different medium. This is not intuitive. So what medium do I use? I needed to find something different, a different way of representing this. And so then I thought, what about the idea of music? Music is so powerful. Music flows into places that words can't reach. Music has the potential to express our deepest emotions, to express our deepest feelings. What about music as a way of expressing who these children are? And so I started exploring this idea with a team of scientists at Blairview, Elaine Bittis, Shannon Kingsnorth, and Patricia McKeever, and we wanted to take a look at this idea of turning the physiological signals of an individual into music. We called the output an individual's biosong. What you're looking at on the screen is a picture of Elaine. It's going to play in the video in a second. And right before the video, I've asked her to stay very relaxed. And in the middle of the video, I'm going to cue her to think of something that stresses her out. And I want you to take a listen to what her biosong sounds like. Try to think of something else that stresses you out. Could you hear that? There's an incredible change. And what's really interesting is that if you hook me up, my biosong sounds completely different from that of Elaine's. Shauna's biosong sounds completely different from either of ours. In fact, if you were to take any of my friends from the lab who've been subjected to my equipment and plug them in and have me turn around and close my eyes, I could tell you which of them was plugged into the equipment because their biosongs are so different. And this is really interesting and also very intuitive because our bodies are really different. Our bodies respond to the environment in different ways. Our bodies have different natural characteristic responses. But we have so much potential there to connect with other people because even though my biosong is different than Elaine's, I can still feel her when I hear her biosong responding. I still know that there was a change there. I still know that she was stressing out. I was wondering what would happen if we introduced this technology to a place like the Complex Continuing Care Unit of Blueview Kids Rehab. Imagine walking down a hallway that normally is populated by silent room after silent room after silent room, and instead hearing songs of the children, unique songs of the children, coming out of every single room. Imagine walking down the hallway and going into a room where you knew who was in there because you heard the song coming out of the room, and hearing the song change as you walked into the room and they responded to your presence. What do you think that would do to healthcare? What would you think that would do to healthcare professionals if they knew that these people who are said to be silent, that they were taking care of, were responding to them, were actually people, could see their personhood inside of them? How do you think their parents would feel? Parents who had never had any sort of interaction with their child before, had never had their child respond to them, walk into the room and have the child's song change because they recognized that their parents were there. How do you think the parents would feel if they heard the child's happy for the first time? I think that this idea has an incredible potential to reveal the personhood of people who are said to be silent, and to allow people to form meaningful interpersonal relationships with these children. And I think that these meaningful interpersonal relationships are the basis of what a home environment looks like. In this space that is part healthcare, part home, I think that this has the potential to balance out those healthcare interactions with those connections that are so important to a home environment. And in doing so, I think that we can transform all of these healthcare units which are populated by silent, motionless people into places where we can form connections and see the person that they really are, transforming them into places of community and places of belonging. This is my idea, and I thought it was worth sharing. Thank you very much.